today. We're going to start with Bob Dwan, who's the Deputy Executive Director of MSBO. He's going to kind of give you an overview of kind of the financial situation. Then we're going to kind of weave in with Ron Wilson and Blake Whitney. Ron is the Superintendent of Ionia Public Schools, and Blake is the Superintendent of the School District. And they're going to give you actual examples of how they've been kind of navigating this with their district. And Chris Stevens is Chris will kind of weave throughout here. And, Chris is our Director of Client Services and a former superintendent of Hopkins Public Schools. So he's going to kind of help to kind of navigate and host us as well. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and get started with Bob. Are you all set, Bob?
Yes, sir. I'm ready to go.
Bob, you have control of the screen.
Well, that is a scary thought. However, we will get there. Well, thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to thank folks at IDEX for making us a part of this. We certainly appreciate being a part of what's happening in the field. And certainly this is a big time for school business officials, superintendents, and of course, boards. And it's one of those times, and I was thinking back, I've been in schools for just over 20 years. And this is probably one of the times that I would say we're in some pretty uncertain waters right now. We've had proration, we've had resettings of the foundation. We've gone through a few things, but right now, this is kind of a critical time that is going to lead us into the future one way or another, whether that means it's on a positive note or a negative note in what we'll see is a reduction in revenues. What I'm going to do is share my screen here, if I can get out to my website, the MSBO website. And I just want to show you where a couple of things are, because I'll talk a lot, but I want you to have some resources that you can go back to. So this is our new look of our website, which is pretty neat. It took us about a year to get here, but we're here. Across the top, you see a lot of drop downs, but school finance, of course, for me is one of our big areas. Funding, when you see funding, you'll see state school aid and revenue forecasts. These are the two spots on our website that I want you to pay attention to over the next couple of weeks, if not through September 30, the state's year end. We are updating this almost daily with new information that comes out. So you're going to hear some things through Gongwer, MERS, or even on listservs from the various organizations. We try to post everything as soon as we get it. A lot of what I think is spurring this is our revenue forecast. And I'm going to jump into that page. And the first thing that pops up is the May revenue consensus. And the first thing is the Senate Fiscal Agency balance sheet. Now, I'm not going to go through this in its entirety, but I just want to frame this or set the tone here by saying the general fund and the school aid fund are both showing a reduction of revenues in the latest CREC, Consensus Revenue Estimating Conference. That is what's brought all this on with the talk of proration or additional federal funding or other means to fill the gap. And you can see down at the bottom of this first column, 1920, which is our current fiscal year, it's just over $1 billion into the negative. Now, there was a change in the revenues of about 1.2 billion negatively, but we had a little bit of carryover. So the problem right now is this $1 billion hole. If you simply take that 1.1 billion and divide it out by students, you're going to get a number, but that's not the way proration works. Proration works, whoever is funded by school aid fund, they take a portion of any kind of reduction in the revenue side. So that means K-12 is a little different than ISDs, which is a little different than higher ed and community colleges. So when you break it all down, it looks and appears that there could be, if proration was the avenue that was taken by the legislature, it would be about a $650 to $700 proration in 1920. That's for this year. So that's pretty critical. This cannot be a negative going into 2021. So however this is solved, and I just read this morning that the governor is thinking there might be a way to do this without prorating schools. I'd like to see it. But what we know today, and I think this is critical for you to understand, what we know today is what this sheet says. It's $1.1 billion down. That's the estimate. That's what everybody agreed to. If we were to prorate based on the calculations in the proration language, it would be about $650 to $700 per kid. That's what I can tell you is known. What I've heard over the last couple of days is, well, we might not have to do that. Well, we could do a little this year, a little next year. Maybe the feds will give us some more funding and we don't have to worry about this. Those are all great conversations. There's a lot of legislators talking to constituents back in their districts saying, you know, I think something's going to happen. It might not be as bad as you think. Those conversations are great. They're happening all around the state. The issue is we have to get back to what we know, and this is what we know. If I'm sitting in your chair as a superintendent or business manager, I'm looking at the calendar and it's almost June. And I know what June means. June means clean up this year's budget and let's start out next year one way or another. And I know beforehand we talked a little bit, what's the guidance right now? Well, the guidance is wait until you can't wait any longer. And that's probably bumping up to your board books and your board meeting dates for June. And then take a look at what we know at that point in time. If we know some other things, if there's more federal funding, if they come out with some type of a discussion on proration or a negative supplemental, you can go in and make those adjustments almost up to the last minute, although we don't like to do that all the time. Looking at 1920 budget, if we don't know anything by the time you go to your June board meeting, you're going to have to do something. All I can tell you is right now it's $650 to $700 a kid. We're going to have to make some assumptions. You're going to have to plug into your network of communications with organizations or anybody else that you're dealing with. IDEX in this case, I'm certain is going to be putting out information to their client base. You're going to have to use the best information you have. As for next year, I've been asked, well, how do you do a detailed budget right now if you don't even know what 1920 is? And I totally understand that. These might be budgets that are softer than what we've seen before. They may be higher level than we've seen before. These are generally going to the board as a resolution at a very high level. And that's what you probably are going to do at this point. Is it going to be detailed down to the individuals that, or the individual programs that may see some trimming next year? I don't know if you're at that point yet. I think that's a lot of time that you would have to spend to get there for really maybe some interesting changes that we see between June and September when truly the state has to have their budget done. So what would I be doing if I'm in your chair? I'm going with what I know. I'm making darn sure, and this is key, that everybody understands assumptions. We say it every year. Make sure the board and the superintendent and even the staff understand the assumptions that you're using when you go into your budget. This year, that is critical. It's also critical to have a plan. If you don't do anything else in the next 3 weeks, have a plan. You don't have to implement yet. Implementation will come later. Right now, you have to have a plan. And that plan probably includes 2 or 3 different scenarios of your budget. Using a system, it makes it very convenient for you to change some of your assumptions and get a different result. As we always say, best case, worst case, most likely. Well, it's pretty difficult to get to any one of those, but I think over the course of the next week or so, you're going to start wrapping your head around what those may be. Some very, very tough times. Let's back away from the COVID for a minute, because that's difficult on its own. Now we're talking about budgets where we really don't know our revenues. That's difficult to the next degree. But I'm a little bit concerned about what student counts look like. I mean, generally, you know, we go out and we do some trending. We see birth rates. We decide, well, let's go with this. We're up 200, we're down 100, we're close to even. What are we going to do this year when we really don't know who's going to feel comfortable sending their students back into our school buildings? Are we prepared to do that? Are we prepared to spread enough space between students? Those are all questions that are kind of up in the air this year. And I think as we look forward to our budget, it's a difficult time. You have state revenues, you have your potential for a reduction in school funding at the per pupil level, and you have an unknown about what's going to happen with your pupil count. due to the fact that there may be people that don't feel safe coming back into your building that first semester. So what does that mean? That means you're going to build a program, you're going to have your students, and that may or may not be what your expectations were, and you're going to have to retrench. And then, hey, second semester, things are working out, the COVID virus didn't come back, and you've got a lot of new kids coming into your classrooms in January. So this is a really tough year for everyone. And from what we have seen, what we are telling folks, number one, have a plan, have multiple plans. Don't worry about implementation yet. That's going to come later. But get ready to have that plan and your scenarios. Be sure everybody understands what the assumptions were that you put into your school budget at a real high level for now, and then working your way into that plan. The process goes on in this year. I imagine we're going to see districts passing something in June, coming back to it in July, maybe August, and by September, you may have done one or two different budget revisions, all of which spur from your work you're going to do in the next 3 weeks with putting together different plans. It's very fluid. It's going to be a tough year. We're certainly here at MSBO to support our membership, as well as get information out as quickly as possible. And sometimes it's not pretty. Sometimes I forget to put a word in an email, but I can tell you, we're trying to push out information to give the decision makers in your district the time they need to make a good decision for all. Outside of additional federal funds, we've seen the ESSER or CARES Act funding. Can that fill the hole? I think it can fill a gap, but I'm not so sure that's the answer. The answer for us is looking at state revenues and state expenditures and determining where there can be some cutbacks. The governor said we might be able to get through this without federal funds and no cuts to schools. Now, I don't know what that's all about, but I'm very interested to see that, and I think others are too. And quite frankly, there may be some revenues out there that we don't know about. There may be appropriations that have not been expended that we can tap into to get us through this point. Demand is still there. The market on the equity side has come back or is coming back. The bond market is still very advantageous for school districts, but that means lower rates. So it's an interesting time, folks. And I know I only had 10 minutes and I'm probably there. So I'm going to stop and pause. If there's any panelist discussion, certainly let me know. If not, I'll just sit back and wait for questions.
Bob, we got a couple questions that I'll quickly throw out here. The first one's about rainy day funds. There's some possibility of possibly using rainy day funds. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, we've got over $1 billion in the state budget stabilization fund, and that's a good thing. However, the last administration prior to leaving put a limit on that, and the limit is 25% spend down until it's gone. So if you look at that, that's maybe $250, $260 million that could be potentially tapped into. But once again, that's just not school aid fund. And if you look at what made up those funds, it's probably not a lot of school aid fund. It's probably a lot of general fund monies in there. Not to say it couldn't be used for school aid, but just know there's a general fund issue out there too, that they're $2.1 billion in the hole. So yes, there are dollars that could be used. I think it'd take a 2/3 vote of the legislature to change that 25% limit, but that is a potential that could be used to help a little bit here.
Okay, second question, Bob, is what about out of formula districts and proration? Would there be cuts to 22J?
Well, that's going to be interesting to see how really the proration would be handled across the board, because we do have some sections of the school aid that are protected. And the listing, which we've seen, and the House Fiscal put together an excellent fiscal note on it, it is not all inclusive. It lacked some of the retirement 147 section that for the most part is protected. So how are they going to deal with this? I don't know specifically, and there hasn't been talk about each categorical. I would assume that across the board, we're all going to feel a little bit of a hit here. It could come in a negative supplemental, which really goes back to the individual sections and hits those. And then if that doesn't do it, it would be an overall proration. you know, a lot of speculation on how they may take care of this, but certainly let's pay attention to those sections, and we certainly are. So
Great. Thanks, Bob. I'm going to quickly switch to my screen one here a second and share that with you. Can everybody see this screen with our IDEX flowchart? Doug, can you see it?
Yep, I see it, Chris.
All right. We put this together just again to kind of frame the discussion that you're going to hear from Ron and Blake coming up. We're here to help. You'll see across the top, we have 3 areas or functions that you use as a superintendent in your skills. You got to remember your communication and your relationships. Again, that's with the board, employees, parents, students, community. Please don't forget any of those groups. We're going to try to make, and we'll help you with data-informed decisions. And remember those systems, internal and external, and how they can help in that budget process. You're going to want to do an analysis. We have the ability to do, as Bob talked about, those high-level projections with multiple examples. And then again, the key that we're going to do for you is help you with data visualization as you look at expenditures all the way down to those object and function codes, operations, transportation, teaching and learning. We can look at your enrollment, student choice, schools of choice, excuse me, and enrollment forecasts. And again, those revenue sides, all the way down to sources, class, title, and 31A. So again, as we look at what Ron has done and what Blake has done, think about it in this format. I hope this helps you as you think about your work in your district and the work that we can do at IDEX to help. Please know we're here to support. Ron, I'm going to turn it over to you. I'll leave this diagram up. I know we've got a tool for you that we'll show as well, but Ron Wilson from Ionia, would you please share with the group what you've been doing and your thoughts on the budget process?
Absolutely. First, I would like to thank IDEX for the opportunity to get together and have this discussion. Thank Bob. Bob bailed me out years ago, one of my first superintendency when I inherited the deficit district. So anyways, I have been using IDEX since 2012. And when we do our budgets each year, we will look at the comparison. We'll compare ourselves to districts that have similar size as far as student enrollment and also similar free and reduced lunch counts. And you can further disaggregate the data or break it down, but you know, those are the ones we would look at when we were doing comparisons. And that's how I would go in and look for what I would call positive deviance. I would look for places that we were spending significantly more money than the average of our peers. And when I came to Ionia 4 years ago, we had to cut $1.2 million my first year from the budget in order to stay within the 8% threshold fund equity that the board had set. And so we use the tool very effectively. And for those of you that aren't familiar with the estimating portion of that, there's a part of the program that allows you to go in. We will update obviously our budget each year, and then as we do revisions, we will send those to IDEX, and those are reflected. And so what Chris is showing, or what he's bringing up right now, is what I've done most recently, because the issue that I have with board members and even central office administration and principals is it's hard to wrap your head around exactly what the multiplier effect is when you start looking at budget cuts or freezes. And so the first slides, the first two graphs there is a picture right from the IDEX program. And the first one shows if we had status quo, and this goes back to 2008, but basically shows our revenue and expenditure trend going back to 2008. And you can see there was a point back in 2017 where our expenditures exceeded our revenues, and we made our adjustments, and you can see what's happened, with our fund equity. If you go to the next slide, initially, some of the early talk, we thought that we might see about 5% cut. And so I was able to go ahead. The program allows you to do 3 separate scenarios, and you can save them and then do 3 more, but you can only do 3 at a time. And anyways, you can see the 5%, how that changes. And that's assuming our expenditures, stay static, that we, if you weren't making cuts. And you can see that fund equity, general fund balance start to flatten out. And if you go to the next one, Chris, the next one is 10%. And you can see that we, pushing out 2 years, actually about 1.5 years, our revenues would fall, significantly below our expenditures. And then you can see once again the corresponding fund balance chart that goes with that. And the last one is 20%. And this basically, I put this together when we were looking at, as Bob had mentioned, a proration this year of between $650 and $700 a student, and a possible, reduction in funding of maybe $600 to $650 for next year. And so for us, that's kind of where we would be. And not only would be you see that 5% threshold in there. And so, we would drop below that rather quickly. And of course I didn't factor in, you can factor in your cuts. And the other thing I only looked at were state revenues. I did not look at federal revenues because we're hoping our federal revenues are going to stay somewhat static. So, but it's powerful to be able to look at that. And actually, those 3 slides or those 4 scenarios, I probably did that in 10 minutes, and so, once you become familiar with the tool, you have the ability to make projections. Bob talked a lot about the assumption piece, and so that's what we've tried to relate to our staff and our board as we work through this process, and saying, here's our assumptions, but we have 3 different scenarios that we're looking at. And, one is assuming the worst case scenario as far as cuts. The second one is looking at what is a blended school day look like if we're part virtual, part person to person with social distancing, and how does that impact our budget? And then we've done a third one that if we were just on a straight virtual like we are right now, what that would look like. And we have the ability very quickly to go in because the program has our current budget, including amendments in there. We can make changes in revenues and expenditures very quickly and see how those trend lines change. I didn't really, unless there was questions or anything else, Chris or Doug, you wanted me to talk about, that was kind of what I had to share.
Doug, I've lost my chat box. Are there questions on the chat line?
I didn't see any more.
Okay.
Nope, no.
There is. I did have one for Bob, and I put in there. I can see it on mine. It says, has the MSBO gone back and looked at how many districts will drop below the 5% fund equity if cuts were made in this year and next year, based on the information we have right now?
Yeah, the tough part about that is that the fund balance information that we have access to would be last year. So depending on what that looks like this year, we wouldn't have that for June 30. However, looking at the last couple of years of fund balance in the state, it has gone up. And there's probably some reasons. I mean, if you looked at an average over the last 5 years, it was leveling out, but it was on its way up in the last 2 years, due to the fact that we have this early warning out there that now people are a little bit more in tune to the 5%, and boards have made some decisions that now we're starting to see the benefits of. So I don't have a specific number, Ron. I wish we did. Once again, it's always tough because we only have a year past information. But I would say this, and I've talked to a few school business groups this last week. I had one group say to me, if it were 650, every district in this ISD would be in deficit. or below the 5%. So my guess is we're walking a thin line of how many districts would enter into that reporting in the 5% level. I would have to say there will be a substantial amount of districts. Now, I don't know the exact number. And quite honestly, I'm not so sure how Treasury and or MD would deal with kind of an onslaught of all of a sudden 400 districts that are showing 5% or lower. And that very well, could be the case coming up.
Great question, Ron. I'd like to move to Blake. Blake, I'll pause my share and let you take the screen.
And your mute is on right now, it looks like, Blake.
Yep.
There you go.
Again, Chris and Doug, although Doug, it looks like you're still Chris.
Yeah.
So thank you for having me. And my name's Blake Pruitt. I'm superintendent in Lakeview Schools in Battle Creek. I've been there 3 years. Prior was superintendent in Ferndale. So I just have a short little slide here.
Great, Blake, we got you up.
Oh, okay. So I've had experience for about 6 years with IDEX. IDEX really saved me when I was in Ferndale. I walked in and they were about ready to go completely in deficit, had teachers at a 7% pay cut the previous year. By the time I left, we were over 10% fund equity. We had been able to bring back the teacher salary. But a lot of that was cuts that people didn't want to touch. But using IDEX, I was able to show the board, the unions, the teachers, the community, here's where we overspend. We were the highest spending on operations per pupil in Oakland County, yet we were one of the smallest districts. It's because we had enough buildings for 7,000 kids and we only had 3,000. So we ended up selling 3 buildings, doing residential development. And the only way we got that through was showing the community we can keep band and orchestra and choir, or we can keep this building. So IDEX has been very helpful to me in trying to move people along. As a former building principal, so I know every time I was told, Blake, do budget cuts, I'd always try to protect my building, protect my staff. IDEX allows you to show exactly where you are as a district and exactly where the money is going. So this is where I'm at right now, working with my district, showing our classroom spending with peers. I do the same as Ron. I pull up peers that are free and reduced lunch, similar size. If I'm doing transportation, I pull up peers that are similar square miles. I'm only 14 square miles. So it's not fair to compare myself with districts that are 100 square miles. Same with when I'm doing operations, I look at building square feet. You can do that in IDEX. But to show the board that classroom spending support services are not that far off from our peers. So the question always becomes, where are we off? So a lot of times I will take IDEX and then I will put it into either Excel or into Google, and then I can get more in depth in certain areas. I also use, the same as Ron, the 3-year projections. So I go kind of back and forth depending on what I want to show. So in curriculum instruction, I can easily show the board where we've spiked, where we've dipped, and where our peers are. So to be able to show them that we're overspending in this area, they made a choice to overspend in that area. I would say we're not seeing the results. So coming back to them to say that's an area that we should look at cutting as opposed to other areas where we might be below. People say cut central office. Well, I can show here's finance, here's HR. Yep, we're below the average bear, so there's really nowhere to cut. Technology is an area because we do one-to-one. So I can show them where, because we don't use bond funds and we don't have a sinking fund, we take all our one-to-one technology out of general funds. So do we continue to do that? Is there a different way to do that? Are we fat in our staffing and technology? So, looking at that, I will say we're taking all our Chromebook purchases for next year out of remaining bond funds. So that's going to help us cut about $400,000 out of the budget for next year that was already put in for Chromebooks. So finance department, I can show here, and because obviously every department, when you say we need to look at some level of cuts, well, we're as tight as we can. Well, no, there's some areas we can look at. Why are we off so much in finance? One area is we did an energy bond, and those payments for the energy bond got put into the finance area. So sometimes you have to dig deeper into your own budget to go, why is that off so much? Oh, these other districts don't have energy bonds, or they've put them in operations instead of putting the expenditure in finance. One of our areas is that we were paying someone retired to manage the finances of the bond. So that's a position we don't need anymore, so that can be a reduction. There was a lot in professional development. We can back some of that off. So in other areas. Security, we massively increased that area as the board really wanted to have more security guards, more police liaisons. But if we're going to be virtual all the times, do we really need all those people all the time? So how do we do that more efficiently? Or do we want to do a retired police officer instead of full-time current officer because it's a lot cheaper? Again, just another area for the board to consider, because if you say, I want to cut one of our police liaisons, the first response is, well, my God, no, we can't do that. Well, let's look at our spending. Is there a different way to do it? A lot of times I will do this by code, function code. This is function code 125. And then I also included, all LEAs, just not the peers. So we're spending a lot in intervention. Are we getting the result? Is that an area we really need to reduce because of how much we're spending? Is it better to put that, per se, if we're low on classroom teachers, that we have really high classroom size and we're not spending as much as the average bear in classroom teachers, do we need to flip that some? So I have to go back one here. So athletics, again, that's another area that we're high in. So telling my athletic director, look at other schools that are like us and give him the list, not just in our conference. Because when you compare us to a school that's only 1,000 students and we're 4,000, or that we've got lacrosse and all these other sports that other schools don't have, where are we spending the money? We're doing two-way transportation. We really can't afford that anymore. We moved to pay all our non-LEA teachers that are coaching out of EDGE staff. That's saved us $80,000. So looking at that area. And then paraprofessionals. I had a local district that told me they're going to be laying off close to 60 paraprofessionals when they looked at their comparisons using IDEX. So why is that number? Is it special ed? If it's special ed, in our county, that's covered 85% if the ISD approves it. So if it's based upon special ed, okay, that's not really a cut I can take. If they're out of general fund, I really need to look at that. And can we really afford that anymore? So those are just some of the ways currently I'm using this. I took out some of the slides that are the same as Ron's in terms of projections and showing the board. So it's been very useful to get board conversation, union conversation, teacher conversation, and giving it to admin to say, here's how much you need to cut out of your department. Either you can figure out where you need it to cut, or I can figure out where you need it to cut. And I might not figure out where you want it. So each department's come back to me with their plans, and we've done 500 a kid, 1,000 a kid, and we even did, just to show the board, at 2,000 a kid. If we did the ridiculous 20 to 25% reduction, you know, basically we've got a stripped down central office, some teachers, an administrator, and maybe a custodian here and there. So that's kind of where I've been using the program as of late.
Great. Well, thanks, Blake. There is a question out there, and Lily, if you unmute people's mics so we can start to have that conversation while this happens. Question out there, is there a way to drill down the expenditure comparisons between districts at the function and the object level? The answer to that is yes. We can show you all of your functions. We can show all of your objects compared to others. Blake was really clear. I just want to follow up on when you see that discrepancy, either at the function or at the object level, you may need to make a phone call and check with those other districts that you're seeing that have discrepancies to find out if there's something happening with how they're coding or where they're putting money. You heard Blake make the statement, we put X issue in this line, and that's why the numbers showed that we were spending more. This helps you identify those districts to call, to reach out and say, how are you doing that? It doesn't make sense. And then you can find out if they've done something different, if they've got a different system, or they've gotten help from an external system like the ISD, as Blake talked about, special ed parapros, or your technology, or other areas, and how systematically you do that. I think the mics might be unmuted. Are there people that have questions that you'd like answered from any of the panelists, or Doug or myself? Okay, I'm not getting any on the typed into the chat. Anybody else out there that has a question?
This is Allison from Livonia. Not a question, but just feedback. I thought that was really helpful, and something I hadn't thought about was, like you said, I think easy go-to for some folks is to say central office, should be cut, and I think the idea of pulling up your functions, like pulling up the business office at 252 and showing them how we compare to our peers, is something that they'll really hold on to more so than us telling them that we're properly staffed. I think definitely showing them the data is a great idea.
Yeah, picture speaks 1,000 words, right? I don't have to try to tell them. They're not going to see it in a spreadsheet, but if I can show it graphically and compared to like districts that they know, that makes the story easier to tell.
And for those of you who aren't aware of it, one of the things that we developed with IDEX years ago actually was Chris's idea, is that there is a spot in the tool that allows you to very quickly look at every function or object item and get a comparison of how you compare in each one on a per student basis, and it shows you what that gap is, and then it multiplies that gap times the amount of students you have, and it shows you if you could get to the average of your peers, this is how much you're either spending more or spending less. And it's a really quick way to kind of prioritize and look at, where are their potentials anyway, at least to look deeper into it. So that's been one of our most powerful tools. And if you'd like more information on that, or would like us to show you that, just reach out to Chris or I or anybody at IDEX, and we'll kind of walk you through that.
And I do call a lot of districts when I look at discrepancies and see, wow, they're doing this a lot more efficiently than I am. What are they doing? And it helps. We have some area soups that we meet on a regular basis, to be able to talk back and forth how people are doing things, or like we did a combined food service program with Penfield School District that's local, to be able to help us, be more efficient in food service, which has helped build our fund equity in food service some.
That's great.
One of the things, Blake, that gets me to is we get to group think. Our group think, meaning this is how we think in our ISD. Maybe if we reach outside of our region, we may figure out somebody else is doing it different, which may be helpful. And we get past that either district group think or ISD group think maybe find a different way to deal with a certain situation. Other questions?
I guess I have a question. This is Allison again from Livonia. You know, one thing our district has prided themselves on is not outsourcing any of our support services other than the teacher subs. And I'm wondering, you know, I'm not necessarily advocating that we do that, but I also feel like it's information that I have to share, you know, just to, again, make sure that it's a conscious decision that we know that we're making. I guess my question is kind of how would you recommend as a business manager I go about, you know, maybe starting that conversation?
Chris, I've done that with IDEX. I don't know if you want to.
Go ahead.
So when
I'll give you the screen back.
no, it's okay.
Okay.
When I was in Ferndale with the operations, a big piece of that was custodial and maintenance, and that we were just way off on that area. So we had to move to privatization just based upon where we were. Obviously, it was not a popular decision. It was very difficult on so many levels, but it allowed me to show the community how off we were. I took it to the union and said, if you can help me bridge this gap, we can keep it in-house. The union at that point was not willing to even talk about how to bridge that gap, so it made it so we had to. I will say at the board meeting, one of my board members turned to the union and said, I am so sorry that you have such poor representation from your UNISERV that they're not even willing to sit down and help us figure this out so we don't have to outsource you. On the opposite end, right now, you know, we have in-house transportation. So it always comes up at some point, well, we should privatize transportation. I can pull up the numbers and show we're going to save about 50,000. It is not worth it. We have our bus drivers are great. They're all community members. Everything runs very efficiently there. There is no reason we should look at outsourcing transportation. So you can use it on both ends.
Allison, another point, as you start to look at those comparable districts that you can peer yourself to, at times you can see somebody that's spending a great deal less. They generally would be outsourcing, and you'll see that those dollars appear in contracted service versus in potentially the line item. So you can start to find out who those districts are so that you could get that comparison group as well. So we'd be happy to help you with that. As Doug said earlier, we're here to help. We can help with creating some of the visualizations for you, showing you how to do that. Again, I'm willing to do one-off trainings. I'm willing to do groups. Again, we're willing to help get you the documentation you need. Please know we're kind of your analytics team that's outside the district. I know Ron's called and Blake's called and asked for this and asked for that. And we're always, always, always going to do our best to help you. Please know that we're one of those systems that you have. You just don't see us in your office, but we're always available either by phone or email.
Good.
Other questions? Well, Doug, we've done about 45 minutes. We told people we would kind of hold to that number. Doug, do you want to wrap things up?
No, just I think Chris, you kind of said it best. First of all, I do want to say thank you for for all of you for taking time out of your unbelievably busy schedule. So and allowing us to kind of share this with you. I want to thank the speakers too. That's fantastic that Bob was willing to take time and kind of give us his perspective, and then our two you know, Ron Wilson and Blake, you guys are fantastic to share your knowledge. So but we're here to help. You know, I hope you do. I like the way Chris framed it. I mean, we are kind of you know, a system for you to reach out to and to help in these kind of key times. And if we got to put our heads down and put our heads together to help you get through something, we'll do that as well. So thank you for being clients of ours. And, you know, I just wish you everybody the best of luck as you go through here. If there's somebody in your district that hasn't attended, that you'd like to hear this to, number one, it's recorded. We're going to have it available, and we are going to run another one next week too. So there'll be another chance to get on here too. So other than that, any other comments? Chris, do you have anything else?
No, again, just thank you. I'm glad I'm retired, guys and gals. I've been through that in the 08 situation. It's not fun. Please keep communicating, keep listening to your groups. Look out there for people to help. The community, the school community is phenomenal. The Bob Dewans, the Ron Wilsons, the Blake Pruitts, they're all in your neighborhood. They're all around. Don't hesitate to pick up the phone. You're not alone.